Matters. Amisha Cross, Democratic strategist and political commentator. Malik Abdul, political consultant and strategist. And Marie Fisher, Vice President of the Maryland Federation of Republican Women. The RNC convention wrapped up this week, and the Republican Party formally nominated President Trump for a second term in the White House. Here's First Lady Melania Trump.
As you have heard this evening, I don't want to use this precious time attacking the other side, because as we saw last week, that kind of talk only serves to divide the country further. I'm here because we need my husband to be our president and commander-in-chief for 4 more years. He's what is best for our country.
All right, I want to hear your thoughts on the convention. I'll start with Marie.
Well, thank God I had a chance last night to see Vice President Pence's speech, acceptance speech, and the energy that I'm feeling from the Republican Party is, I can't explain it. Not only from the Republican Party, but just people throughout the street, I'm meeting people who are Democrats who are saying they want to vote for President Trump because they think he's taking the country in the right direction. They look at the lawlessness, they look at the riots, they look at basically some of the anarchy going on in some of the inner cities. And I hate to say it, that scares people.
Yeah.
And people just want law and order. They just want to get up, safe schools, safe homes. They want their families safe.
Yep.
And right now, they're not seeing that.
Preston, your thoughts?
Well, I think the contrast between the two conventions was clear. One party is setting up now to be a working party people. I'm young enough to remember when Democrats used to be the working party people. Now it's basically the DNCCP with corporate elites in Hollywood and New York. They're a hedge fund party. And so the contrast for the fall will be quite stark. It will be interesting to see what the contrast looks like for small businesses. And I'm excited for the next 60 some odd days.
All right, Amisha, what do you think of the RNC convention?
The RNC convention has been interesting thus far because going into it, President Trump and the Republicans said that they were going to take a different tone than what they saw from Democrats. They were going to spread this hopeful message. And what we saw on day 1 in the majority of day 2 was the complete opposite. There was shouting down of a woman's right to choose. There was the amplification of what they saw as extreme violence in communities, even though these are people literally protesting to save Black lives. We saw an administration that has and continues to throw a lot of negativity towards immigration, even though there was that faulty immigration ceremony that we saw live. I do think that from the clip you showed earlier, that Melania Trump, to her credit, did a lot to reset that tone. It was calming. She wasn't aggressive. She was someone who seemed as though she did have a hopeful vision. And I think that as an immigrant, she could tell that story in a different way than a lot of her husband's rhetoric, as well as some of his advisors.
All right, Malik.
Conventions typically don't change minds. And so whether we were talking about last week at the Democrats convention, there are a lot of people who felt as if it was great. Most of them were Democrats and were going to support Biden anyway. This week you have Republicans think that the Republican convention is great. They're probably going to vote Republican anyway. I wanted to specifically talk about Melania Trump because I'm a big fan of Melania Trump. I think she's great. But the tone, the response to her is what I really have a problem with. A lot of that was really rooted in a lot of sexism, a lot of xenophobia. We saw that with Bette Midler. We saw that with Cardi B. We saw that the angst, the problem that people have with Melania Trump is associated with her husband.
Right.
And we saw in 2016 and in the entire history of Hillary Clinton is that we weren't supposed to blame Hillary Clinton or take anything out on Hillary Clinton based on how we felt about her husband.
Yeah, there's a bit of a double standard. But speaking of the election, Hillary Clinton this week had a word of advice for Joe Biden.
Joe Biden should not concede under any circumstances because I think this is going to drag out, and eventually I do believe he will win if we don't give an inch and if we are as focused and relentless as the other side is.
I'll start with Amisha on this one because when I see this, the first thought I had was she thinks they're going to lose.
Well, I know where Hillary was going with that. It's not a step that I personally would have taken or thought. If you're going to talk about there being mass voter disenfranchisement, go ahead with that. But I think that what she's leaning on is what we saw in Georgia, the Stacey Abrams model. At the end of the day, Stacey Abrams still lost, but she did not concede. And we also have a President Trump who has said multiple times before that even if he was to lose, he would still stay in the White House. So I think that there is a certain level of pushback she was trying to give there. We also know that this is going to be a presidential race that is won within the margins. Neither candidate is going to take off with it. So it's going to be really tight. So we do need to hold out for every single vote to be counted.
I do think your characterization is right, with the exception, I don't think Trump said even if he were to lose, he would stay in the White House. I think he was contesting whether the election is valid. There's concerns on both sides about that. But Preston, your thoughts on Hillary Clinton?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of business owners are concerned about the incoming environment. This will be the most left administration ever in history. It's interesting that you have Eric Garcetti saying that on the one hand, and then you have other people trying to spin it as somehow Joe Biden's a moderate, when in reality he was, it's basically a wolf in sheep's clothing where they run him like a moderate, but then they kind of Trojan horse him with AOC and making him the most left president ever. You could practically see the CCP's puppet strings on Hillary Clinton as she made that statement. It's really disgusting, and what I want to know from Joe Biden is, will he promise that this comes on the back of a war game that was led by top advisors around Biden and Clinton. Will Biden promise not to secede or threaten secession if he does lose? Because that was one of the scenarios that they talked about publicly in that Breitbart article.
Yeah, they did talk about that. Real fast, just a few seconds.
I don't like how she said, I don't like what she said, because I don't know if people remember 20 years ago how we didn't know the end of that election until December. And that pulled down our economy. And right now, with COVID and everything else, we can't afford to be pulled down anymore. So for her to say, don't concede under any circumstance, you're setting up for 2000, but a more extreme version.
Huge juxtaposition between 2016 and now. The idea that Hillary Clinton is saying that Joe Biden shouldn't concede, when that is the very criticism that they were having of Donald Trump, is that if he lost, he would not concede the election. So I don't think it's very good for our politics, but Hillary Clinton has really been in the same place she was since 2016.
Yep. When we come back from the break, we will discuss the latest update on the coronavirus treatments and start the lightning round. We'll be right back.